On this very spot, Jorge Eliécer Gaitán was assassinated on the 9th of April 1948, and this unleashed a wave of violence, first in Bogota and then in the rest of Colombia, that lasted a decade and was known as La Violencia, an undeclared civil war. Some people claim this civil war still lasts till today. How did it start? How did it end? It's what you're gonna find out in this video. Keep watching. Many countries in South America have a dark past. I think it is safe to say that the history of Colombia is perhaps the most ugly of them all. Ever since its independence, the country has been a torn country. If you remember my episode about Simón Bolívar's Gran Colombia, you know about the division between the centralists and the federalists. After the downfall and partition of this Latin American superstate that was from now on known as the Republic of New Granada, there was internal violence. In the second half of the 19th century, there were numerous internal conflicts where, in most cases, the liberals fought against the conservatives. There's too many to explain in this video. There was internal fighting in the 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s, and there were two conflicts in the 1890s, the latter spilling over into the 20th century. And this conflict was known as the Thousand Days War. In this conflict, the liberals again fought against the conservatives, as well as against the National Party. The fighting, characterized by fierce battles and guerrilla warfare, led to significant loss of life and widespread destruction. It resulted in a conservative victory, and between 100,000 and 180,000 Colombians had perished in the conflict. The conflict also led to the separation of Panama from Colombia. And in the upcoming decades, the conservatives were in charge and they were calling the shots. However, they did apply liberalism to the economy. During the 1902-30 period, economic liberalism and political conservatism reached their zenith. The basis of this symbiosis was a peculiar coffee economy based largely on smallholders in the west of the country and a population strongly influenced by the clergy and by conservative electoral politics. In 1930, Colombia got a liberal president, Enrique Olaya Herrera. The Great Depression brought economic challenges and the liberal administration faced opposition from conservative factions. And this deep political divide would lead to the brutal conflict La Violencia that took place after the Second World War. Some historians claim that La Violencia already started in the 1930s because it was also then that acts of violence occurred. But what were the underlying causes for this violence? Abusive labor conditions played a large role in this. In 1928, near Santa Marta on the north coast, banana workers, fed up with the abusive treatment by foreign management, low salaries and abysmal living conditions, went out on strike. The army was brought in and a massacre followed. The death toll remains disputed. Some say it was in the tens, others say in the hundreds. This set the following paradigm. In the future, disagreements would be solved by violence rather than by negotiations. Due to the Great Depression, people were pushed off the land, and despite Colombia having a liberal president, the social structure of the Colombian countryside remained more or less intact. When World War II broke out, Colombia was neutral. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, it broke off diplomatic relations with the Axis powers, and after a series of U-boat attacks on Colombian ships, Colombia declared war on the Axis powers, yet it did not commit troops to the war effort. Apart from economic dislocation because of the European markets being cut off, the war also created opportunities for Colombia to modernize its army and society. With the US Land-Lease program, Colombia was granted $16.5 million in military assistance. Money went to highway constructions, agricultural programs, and the building of a hydroelectric plant. Nevertheless, the huge division between the rich and the poor remained. And there was one politician who was willing to stand up against this conservative oligarchy. A young, charismatic Bogota lawyer from the lower classes named Jorge Eliécer Gaitán. He had studied law in Italy and was influenced by the rhetorical speeches of fascist dictator Mussolini. Instead of becoming a fascist, he identified with the working poor and held several important political posts, such as member of the Bogota City Council, Minister of Education, and Mayor of Bogota. Now, in 1946, he ran for president. The Liberal Party did not endorse his candidacy. A conservative president was elected. This left the liberals severely frustrated. Yet, Gaitán was the favorite candidate for the upcoming 1950 elections. It was anticipated that he would win, and then he would transform Colombia. It would never got to this point. On the 9th of April 1948, he drank a coffee, his last coffee, in Café Pasaje in downtown Bogota. He then walked to the next street, and on the spot you see right here, he was assassinated. He was shot dead by Juan Roa Sierra. There are different theories and even some mysteries surrounding the assassination. Some claim it was a plot of the USSR. Others claim the United States was behind it. Many believe that the conservatives were responsible for the attack. Anyhow, Sierra fled the scene, but he was chased down by a mob and lynched. And it didn't stop there, because what followed was known as El Bogotazo. This was a 10-hour riot that left much of downtown Bogota destroyed. It's kind of hard to explain what exactly happened because it was a total mayhem. Let's just take a look at this picture right here. We see a mob, most likely they're drunk, armed with machetes and knives. Interesting enough, Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro was in Bogota and participated in the riots. Stores were raided and looted, and also tram cars became the victim, as we can see here on these images. Liberal demonstrators, infuriated by the death of their beloved politician Gaitán, were mobilized via radio broadcasts and tried to storm the government palace on Plaza Bolivar. One person recalled, "We felt anguish and looked crazy because we couldn't do something, nothing to do. The helplessness of men with their eyes wild, drooling, all of us looking for a way to get revenge, to enter the palace. That was what we wanted. In that moment, there was no fear, there was courage and resolve." Liberal politicians tried to calm down the crowd, but to no avail. The police couldn't do anything. In some cases, police officers joined the crowd, and eventually the army was brought in to restore order. By that time, between 600 and 3,000 people are believed to have died, and around 500 were hospitalized for their injuries. Liberals of all stripes, including Gaitanistas and near-communists, blamed the Bogotazo on criminals who distorted the authentic grief of the people. This interpretation was itself a distortion and permitted elites of both parties to speak in the most extravagant and racist terms about the impossibility of civilizing the Colombian masses. Such phrases as incompetent rebel and country of savages became common currency. The conservatives blamed the liberals for being inspired by international communism. Conservative Colombian President Mariano Ospina Perez denounced the Bogotazo as a communist plot and broke off diplomatic relations with the USSR. El Bogotazo was seen as the start of La Violencia. Now, this is not your ordinary civil war, because in a quote-unquote normal civil war, there can be battle lines. There is one faction controlling this territory, another controlling that territory. On a macro level, we saw communist and liberal militias fighting against the Colombian army and conservative militias. If we zoom in on a micro level, what's going on the ground is what we see where local governments employing civilians to either police the violence or enact their own agendas to, for example, settle old scores. Often there was fighting over land and resources. And this resulted in widespread and brutal acts of violence and massacres. Uruguayan journalist Eduardo Galeano, who wrote the best-selling book Open Veins of Latin America, described the cruelty. It was a war of incredible cruelty, and it became the worse as it went on, feeding the lust for vengeance. New ways of killing came into vogue. The corta corbata, for example, left the tongue hanging from the neck. Rape, arson, and plunder went on and on. People were quartered or burned alive, skinned or slowly cut to pieces. Troops razed villages and plantations, and rivers ran red with blood. The first years of the conflict were the worst and saw the most casualties. An estimated 43,000 people died in the first year alone. The conflict demonstrated the failure of Colombia as a state. Rather stating it is a civil war, which frankly it was, it can also be described as the downfall of social order into complete anarchy. The government of Colombia at the time was basically confined to the cities and had no influence on the countryside. The people on the countryside were not willing to obey the government, obeying politicians who wrote laws while they knew nothing about Colombian rural life. The Liberal Party decided not to bring forward a candidate for the 1950 elections, and this goes to show that violence from now on was the only way to solve political disputes. The people on the countryside, they realized that the government in Bogota could not and would not respond, and thus they took matters into their own hand. The ensuing conflict saw the disconnect between the urban and rural populations, between the rich and the poor. Most of its 200,000 deadly victims were young, poor men. So how did the Colombian government try to end the violence? Following the presidency of Ospina, the conservative Laureano Gómez was elected president. Gómez was later toppled in a coup d'etat in which army commander Gustavo Rojas Pinilla assumed to control the country in 1953. Pinilla wanted to end the bloodshed. He announced that every fighter, liberal or conservative, that would lay down its weapons and surrender would not be prosecuted. This, in a single stroke, ended most of the violence, but not all, because the extreme factions on both the left and the right went on, and they controlled their own mini-states in the Colombian interior and ruled as they saw fit. In 1957, the National Front was set up as Colombia returned to civilian rule. In this party were both the conservatives and the liberals. They would rotate in and out of the presidency every 4 years through competitive elections. There is little doubt that the National Front succeeded in dampening down rural violence, but hostility, anger, and revenge killings in the countryside did not end overnight because of an elite political agreement at Bogota. Gradually, as in other Colombian conflicts, the violence grew counterproductive. The end of La Violencia was not the end of violence in Colombia, because in 1964 another conflict flared up. This conflict is known as the Colombian conflict and is still ongoing. It involved many different factions, some you may have heard of. Left-wing guerrilla organizations such as the ELN and the FARC, as well as right-wing paramilitaries and the drug cartels, most infamous the Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel. The latter one was run by Pablo Escobar. This all led to kidnappings, terrorist attacks, murders, massacres that claimed the lives of another 200,000 people, and millions of Colombians were internally displaced. Escobar got killed in the early 1990s, and in 2016 a peace was signed orchestrated by the Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos with the FARC, which led to the de-escalation of the violence. For this, Santos won the Nobel Peace Prize. It was also after that time that tourism in Colombia began to boom. Unfortunately, some groups continue the struggle, and the drug trafficking is far from over. But to end on a positive note, after years of bloodshed, Colombia had made an incredible transformation, as it is a very popular destination for international tourists. And after visiting most of the South American countries myself, I can say that Colombia is hands down the most awesome country in South America to visit. Thanks to my patrons, you see their names on the screen, and a special thanks to Rainy Bachtel, Thomas Sapiega, Damian Wallace, Connor, Marcus Gass, Nick Terranova, Mark Littlehill, Justin Trebell, Tanya Dixie, Susanna Di Bella, Fabrizio, Robert Meehan, David H. Ovett, Wayback History, Michael Brucey, Daniel Holland and Marcus Fielding. And thanks to Nicolas from Bogota, who guided me around and helped me with the filming. If you want to learn more about Colombia and World War II, click here. And I also have a video about Grand Colombia, click right here. Thank you so much for watching, and adios from Bogota.